To the second part of this morning session with item 6 and 7. So there are a lot of new members and comitology might be quite complicated. So just for you to know that we are in the process of discussing an objection on an implementing act from the Commission. And you have, I guess, on your agenda the whole list of products concerned. I'm not going to read it. And we are going to organize the debate in two categories, so 6 and 7 jointly, because it's a request for objection set by the GUE as a rapporteur. You were, Ms. Azebkamp, the rapporteur for that. So I will give you the floor for 4 minutes jointly with the 6 and 7. And then, as I told, as there are a lot of new members, don't hesitate also to give background information on the process and where we are. So I give you the floor for 6 and 7 for 4 minutes as a rapporteur.
Thank you. In fact, it is not, the objections are not about all of the substances mentioned in the title. It's mainly about two of them, chlorotoluron and flumioxazine. And let me give you some general background information. The European legislation says that human health and the environment should be taken care of at all times. And economic interest should never prevail over the protection of the environment and public health. Shockingly, exactly this is what is happening with the renewals of these pesticides. Toxins, which are known to be harmful, stay on the European market for many years after their authorization has expired. Therefore, I object to the extension of the approval periods of flumioxazine and chlorotoluron. Flumioxazine is toxic for the reproduction and is also a known endocrine disrupting chemical. Chlorotoluron is an endocrine disruptor and causes damage to the unborn child. Both are very toxic to the aquatic life with long-lasting effects. And these facts are confirmed by EFSA and ECHA and have been laid down in the European laws since at least 4 years. These facts should have led to the withdrawal of this authorization by the Commission years ago. Article 21 in the Pesticides Regulation tells them so. But instead, they invoked Article 17 and extend the authorizations 6 times in a row. This demonstrates the Commission's fear of the mighty chemical industry, fear that they will sue. I will say to the Commission, let them try. I dare the Commission. Put the protection of our vulnerable environment and public health first, and to face the big chem in court. Because they have the scientific facts, the European Parliament and the law at their side, if they finally choose to stand up against this industry. The extensions of hazardous chemicals are in contradiction with pesticides regulation, and as only substances which are proven to be safe can be authorized. And it is in conflict with the EU's treaties, which enshrines the precautionary principle and obliges the Commission to protect our health and our environment. So, Commission, please stop allowing known harmful pesticides on our fields, on our plates, and withdraw these 2 substances from these extensions. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to give the floor to the shadows again for the joint debate on 6 and 7, starting with the EPP, so 3 minutes per group. If you have 2 shadows, one for item 6, one for item 7, then please split 1:30, 1:30. If you have only one shadow or one speaker, you have 3 minutes per group. Is it clear? So let's start with the EPP. You have two shadows, Christine Schneider and Michel Wiesik. Up to you for 3 minutes.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. I can understand the reasons put forward by the rapporteur, and I share her concerns. We have here carcinogenic materials, and these should either be completely banned or limited so that the risks for human health can be ruled out. The approval of extending the approval periods, this is regulated by law, and the Special Committee on Pesticides said last year that the approval must always be based in science. When we talk about the approval of substances, this must be also harmonized better. Now, if we want to agree to 34 substances being extended in terms of their approval period, or whether they should be not renewed or taken off the list, the legal steps to follow are very clear. The Commission must extend their periods if reassessment has been completed. And this is the case here. The extensions are related or caused by delays at EFSA or the member states. And this delay on the member state side are one of the critical points on which Parliament highlighted last year. Now, the decision on extending approval periods of certain substances can take place in 3 months or in 6 months. If this happens, this could have serious consequences. It could be done in an arbitrary manner and not based on scientific evaluation. We need to ensure that our farmers have legal certainty and that they don't have to depend on damaging pesticides so they can produce healthy food. We need to protect our citizens. And for some substances, there are no replacement substances. There are also substances that come under the cut-off regulation. These are not freely available and may only be used in certain individual cases. In my opinion, the final decision by the Commission should be clear, and for this reason, I cannot agree with the position of the rapporteur. We cannot have any arbitrary banning on certain substances. Thank you.
Thank you. Was it only on item 6 or also on item 7, your political position? Do you want to take the floor as well? Okay. So, Mr. Wiesik, please stick to 1 minute. Even if I can already warn the other groups that the SND does not have any speaker, Greens neither, ID neither. So if you want to have speaker, please raise your hands.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. I was the shadow reporter, so to say, for the chlorotoluron. I really understand that the process is quite complex and difficult to grasp, but what I really wanted to stress is that we cannot neglect the health impacts of these substances, and this should be taken into consideration. And I personally was for the commitment, but this is something different on the fraction level, so to say. But right now, I really think that the health and the health security should be on the first place in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for SND, okay, so nobody from SND. So for Renew, two speakers, Martin Opsik and Véronique Trier-Lenoir. So, who starts?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start by talking about the two objections, and my colleague Martin Oisling will add some remarks. 6 of these substances are endocrine disruptors, which have potential side effects. A number have just been mentioned. One causes serious developmental issues. Also, another one has problems for reproduction. Now, a number of experts have warned about these. Many farmers have to face risks relating to these substances, and also they can be subject to neurological issues. I have seen that 17 of these substances have been subject to reservations by member states. I suggest that the European Commission present us a list of the substances classified by level of risks rather than a melting pot of products that are treated in the same way. We should all put pressure on member states who have to carry out evaluations to do these as soon as possible. For example, one of these substances has been implemented since 2002 without any further evaluation. Some MEPs have said that we can punish producers by banning substances. I am here personally to help save human lives and not to save chemical products. For all of these reasons, I'm opposed to extending the approval period for these substances, and I therefore this afternoon will vote in favour of the objection proposed by Ms. Hazekamp. Thank you. Thank you very much. Martin Hojsich, please.
Chair, the foundation of the objection is obviously the health and environmental impacts of a number of the chemicals. And I will not repeat my colleague in stressing out these. I think these are really grave, and it's really a shame that what we receive is a bundle of different chemicals together, where now some of them are not such a problem, but a number of them are a serious concern and need to be phased out. I want to point out one additional challenge that we face, and that the European agriculture, the European farmers, the European citizens and environment face. What we are stifling here is also the innovation, the green innovation. What we are seeing here that the old pesticides, which we know a number of them have hazardous impacts on bees, for example, that we just discussed, not just humans and other pollinators, keep on being on the market with the excuse of not having sufficient information, while we cannot get safer alternatives to replace them. That's where the problem lies. We have a system which doesn't work, and therefore I think we have to support this objection and showcase that we don't need to only get rid of the hazardous chemicals that we use as pesticides, but we need to also bring out safer alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the Greens, Michel Rivasi, for 3 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Hazekamp for these two objections. I'm going to talk about chlorotoluene and flumioxazine. Well, the problem is that both of these substances were classified reprotoxic. For both of them. Then they were classified as probably being endocrine disruptors. And people say we need to ban all of these substances, whether they are endocrine disruptors or carcinogenic. Now, they are recognized, as my colleague said, they have toxic effects on health. For years now, we have been postponing the evaluations. We need to stop here. We can't say there's a cancer epidemic in Europe. We know many cancers are caused by pesticides. I'm not saying these two in particular cause these, but public opinion wants to see pesticides stopped. What do? Well, we just keep on delaying things. We say we need to wait another year before carrying out the evaluations. When I look at chlorotoluene, there is detections in water as well. These can be found across the environment in water, for example. And on flumioxazine, for years now, this has been subject to potential replacement for years. We need to stop using these. But the Commission is always on the side of the chemical industry. You have an agency which says that it's toxic. Scientists are saying it's toxic. What are you doing? Well, you postpone the evaluations. So we need to stop using these substances which kill people.
Merci. So for ID, any speaker? No. For ECR, Mr. Vondra, for 3 minutes. For ID, sorry. No, for ECR,
I'm speaking for ECR.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, we just didn't tell you.
Please go ahead.
But, OK, the ECR opposes both the resolutions. We don't think the Commission has exceeded its implementing powers. And frankly, the draft measures are fully consistent with the legal processes specified in the Basic Act. The Commission noted in its own technical summary that the extensions foreseen in the draft regulation are necessary because it won't be possible to adopt a decision on renewal or non-renewal before the expiry date of the current approval. And that's for reasons that are beyond the control of the applicants. Now, thankfully, the Parliament does not have any veto powers over these implementing measures. And opposing the authorisation extension of these, there are 63 substances, 34 in the first implementing regulation, 29 in the second, would be an unsubstantiated ban on substances already approved for the EU market and which are in the final stages of being reapproved. Now, we all know, and particularly looking over there, those of us who sat endlessly on the PEST committee in the last Parliament, Regulation 1107 has the most stringent regulatory reapproval system for pesticides and active substances in the world. It's a process that requires the completion of a rapporteur member state dossier, assessment report, public consultation, the EFSA conclusion, decisions from the Commission Standing Committee and the Commission itself. This can inevitably lead to delays which require a short extension, as is the case here. So in the vast majority of cases, these delays tend to be beyond the control of the applicants. And so that is why this procedure is necessary to give market certainty and to make sure that farmers and growers have those in the toolbox, have those substances in their toolbox. So the Commission's obligation to extend the approval of the active substances, such as the circumstances laid out in Article 17 of 1107, as well as the Ombudsman in her decision in case 687 of 2018. Such extensions are intended for a maximum of 1 year, and a decision on renewal or non-renewal of approval has to be adopted at the earliest possible date. So in the case of a non-renewal of the approval, the extension granted will be revoked. So finally, it's worth noting that the extensions contained in the implementing acts are not due to any concerns over the safety of these substances. Nothing to do with the safety of the substances. If there were any potentially harmful effects on human or animal health or unacceptable effects on the environment, this would trigger a process where the Standing Committee would determine whether the approval should be withdrawn. So I think that we are very foolish to be opposing the approval.
Thank you. So I will give the floor for a maximum of 5 minutes to the Commission. represented by the DG Santé and Klaus Behrens.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry that my first appearance in front of the committee is all about objections. Yes. Ms. Hazekamp, to start with, first of all, let me underline that we fully agree that economic interests do not prevail in the decision-making on pesticides. And we get, I don't know how many letters on this, and nonetheless, we have adopted a number of non-renewals and withdrawals or refusals of approvals in the course of last year, and we are not afraid of the chemical industry. We are not afraid of court cases. I think we have 15 court cases at the moment ongoing, and the number keeps growing by the week. So that is of no consideration in this. So let me just underline that these extensions are indeed necessary, and we are obliged to adopt them in accordance with Article 17 of the PPP regulation, which clearly states that when the renewal procedure cannot be completed for reasons beyond the control of the applicant, the Commission shall extend the approval periods. There is no room for maneuver here, and this has also been confirmed by the Ombudsman, as referred to by Ms. McIntyre. The reasons why we are late is usually because the member states do not deliver their reports on time. And this has been highlighted by Ms. Trier-Lenoir. Let me give you the example of chlorotoluene. The dossier was submitted to the rapporteur member state Bulgaria and the co-rapporteur France on 30th of April 2015. And they should have delivered their report 1 year later, in April 2016. It has actually been delivered to EFSA just now. So more than 3 years of delay by the rapporteur and the co-rapporteur to deliver this report. This is really not the fault of the applicant. Also, just to react to one of the elements you raise in your justification, chlorotoluene met the ED criteria, the interim ED criteria, but it has not been identified as a possible ED in the study that was conducted when we proposed the criteria for the scientific criteria for identifying EDs. And for flumioxazine, please note that the RAC in ECHA agreed in March this year that it is not to be classified as reprotoxic. So that has changed in the recent past. So be that as it may, Article 17 leaves us no room for maneuver. If the procedures are not completed for reasons beyond the control of the applicant, and we have no clear indications that the approval criteria are not met, we must extend the approvals. However, we have now a case before the Parliament, and there will be a debate in the Agri Committee this afternoon, where during the assessment, at the stage of the peer review by EFSA, there are clear indications that the approval criteria are not met, and the procedure is not yet completed. And we are proposing now, for the first time, to withdraw the approval because there is sufficient evidence to do so. And that is very different for the substances that are included in the two regulations here. There, we are not at the stage yet that we have clear evidence that the approval criteria are not met. And therefore, once again, we must extend these approvals at the moment. We regret that very much. We regret very much that the member states do not deliver their work on time. Indeed, we will address this also in the refit evaluation of the regulation, that this is one of the major problems, that the member states do not respect deadlines and do not complete their work within the time foreseen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to vote this afternoon on these objections. So we will have the results very soon. We can move to the other debate before the voting session this afternoon on 3 objections on GMOs. So again, we are going to organize a joint debate over the 3 objections. And then we are going to start with Tilly Metz as a rapporteur.
Thank you, Mr. President, Pascal Coffin. Yes, we are talking now about objection on placing on the market the following genetically modified crops. It's GM maize, GM soybean, and 5-stack GM maize, and 14 of its sub-combinations. I won't go in all the details, but let me just point out 3 arguments why we formulate this objection. First of all, the risk to consumer health, lack of democracy in the decision-making process, and the question of what the Commission takes into account in its decision-making process. So first of all, risk to consumer health. What we have here is crops that are so genetically injured so that they are tolerant to more than one herbicide. And this modification allows herbicide to be used to treat weeds throughout the cultivation of the crops without killing the crop itself. But then we have an overuse of these herbicides, mostly glyphosate, on crops, and has led to a development of herbicide-resistant weeds. And then the response of the biotech companies is that to increase the number of herbicides. So you see, we're really in a vicious circle there. And this heavy dependence on chemical input has implications for the environment, for the biodiversity, for the health of consumers. I'm speaking here of the import of food and feed. We know that the herbicides to which GM crops have been made to be tolerant is glyphosate and glufosinate. Glufosinate is no longer allowed to be used in Europe and is toxic for reproduction. And we know all the question related to the cause of cancer by glyphosate. However, the GMO panel at EFSA does not really assess the residues from spraying with complementary herbicides, their combined toxicities, because we really have a cocktail here of herbicides, and also the interaction with a genetically modified plant and this herbicide. So we need this safety test really to go into the detail and not only analyzing the genetically modified plant. And then talking about the 5-stacked GM mice, this is plant produce insecticide chemicals known as Bt toxin, and this may affect the immune system. But there are no tests that are carried out by the EFSA to identify the unintended effects of Bt toxins. So that's the first conclusion. We cannot allow this genetically modified crops if we don't know all the risk for human and animal health and for the environment. Second argument, we have really a lack of democracy in the decision-making process. I just remember, or I just tell the new MEPs that are maybe here, that in the last legislative period, we had 36 objections that were formulated by the European Parliament, and they had also no qualified majority in the member state. But nevertheless, the Commission authorized them. So this is a systematic lack of democracy. So really my question is to the Commission, why does it continue to authorize GMOs despite the lack of support from both member states and the European Parliament, which are the people who represent the citizens? So on the other side, my third argument is the crucial question. So what counts in the decision-making process? What are really the legitimate factors of the Commission if the European Parliament and the member state does not count? And what about the EU obligation under the Paris Climate Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or the UN Convention on Biological Diversity? These are international agreements that the European Union has signed up to. Don't they have any weight? So what has the Commission to say about this? And in the case of the soybean, let me remember that this soybean is one of the key drivers of deforestation. And so this soybean should not be authorized unless it doesn't contribute to the deforestation, and we have then the proofs to be there. And then this echoes also the Parliament adopted a report last year on forest, and these are also the priority that recently the Commission said in a recently adopted communication about stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world forest. So I hope, dear colleagues, that you can support these objections, but I also look forward to get your point of views. Many thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to give the floor to the...
Hvala, zdaj pa politične skupine, najprej ELS. Izvolite. Hvala. Slišala sem, da so v prejšnjem mandatu poslanci vlagali veliko ugovorov in mislim, da bo nažalost tudi tokrat tako. EFSA je vsem tem proizvodom dala pozitivno mnenje in niso nakazali, da bi ti proizvodi lahko bili bolj škodljivi od konvencionalnih alternativ. In komisija je to sprejela. Mislim, da je tako tudi prav. Če EFSA pravi, da je proizvod varen, potem moramo zaupati temu znanstvenemu nasvetu. To so pravila, ki smo jih sprejeli in to pač komisija tudi počne. Zato niso prekoračili svojega mandata. Zato spodbujam kolegice in kolege v odboru, da glasujejo proti tem ugovorom. Hvala. Hvala, socialisti, gospod Sil. Hvala.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, these three resolutions on the approval of these genetically modified products are supported by some groups, but in the past, we have tried to send out a strong signal in our parliament. Obviously, we don't want any GMO plants and foods to be accepted in Europe because there is a threat to human health and that of animals as well. So the question is, what is the Commission's position on our majority resolutions? What's the position of the new Commission to respect the majority in this Parliament? I think that's going to be one of the most decisive questions to avoid this type of discussion cropping up again in the future in this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So for Renew, Mr. Stefanuta.
Chairman, this is not and should not be an ideological debate about supporting GMOs or not. Any of these debates should be about looking at the specifics, and this is what I've done. And following that, I signed 2 of the 3 objections that were raised today for very particular reasons, but for specific reasons. I find that these GMOs are modified to resist high dosages of old and harmful pesticides, one of which is banned for use in the EU, and the other one which is deemed to have carcinogenic properties. So in my reading, we would have allowed, through the back door, an increase in the chemical treadmill of pesticides on our territory by going forward with this process. Furthermore, there is a rise of pesticide-resistant weeds, which will only have the effect of locking farmers even further into the chemical treadmill I spoke about, impending innovation in the field of next generation or low-risk pesticides. Overall, our group, supports innovation, is very much in favor of having a wise scientific approach, but this is not the case of innovation, because the placing on the market of these GMOs for 10 years is by no means a step forward in promoting innovation or ensuring the high level of human health protection stated in the Article 168 of the treaty. Hence, I join the colleagues from different groups in signing these objections. And maybe just a last word, an institutional question. We find ourselves, as you said, in the last legislative period with tens and tens of these objections. I wonder if we can work more on the legal basis so that we are not always faced with implementing decisions, but maybe go more towards delegated acts. I do believe this is a place where the Parliament needs to make its political point, and it's the only one, it's the only way in which we can make it. I would like to have the discussion perhaps with the Secretariat or with the Commission to clear me whether we shouldn't go more in the direction of delegated rather than implementing acts. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you know, ENVI asked the Commission to withdraw the current legislation and to propose a new one. So now the ball will be in the camps on the new Commission. So we will see what happened. For ID, we don't have any speaker. please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues. Well, 60,000 tons of Brazilian soya was landed in France a few days ago, but I'm delighted that the Commission now is allowing us to discuss the question of soya imports into the European Union. The European Union is the second soya importer after China. And GMO soya particularly comes from Brazil, but it's paradoxical. European member states ban the GMO crops of soya on their soil, but some other member states massively import GMO soya. According to Greenpeace France, Europe, France in particular, doesn't need to import products from the far end of the world. And Macron said that he wanted to re-establish Europe's protein sovereignty. I think we have to reduce the volume of production and of soya and replace it with other protein crops, such as peas, for example, or lucerne. And we would encourage the Commission not to push ahead with these trade agreements which undermine our own health in Europe. Thank you.
For ECR, please.
Thank you, Chair. We oppose all of these objections. The Commission hasn't exceeded its implementing powers, and the draft measures are entirely consistent with the legal processes specified in the Basic Act. The EU risk assessment process for GM crops and foods is one of the strictest in the world. It provides member states and the public with many opportunities for input, and it's robust enough to ensure that approved GMO products are as safe as conventionally grown products. GMO regulation must be underpinned by science, and products passing the EU's independent safety assessment should have fair market access. If we continually question the objectivity of this science, we risk undermining the legitimacy of our entire regulatory system. In the last parliamentary term, this committee adopted oral questions and a resolution on the subject of vaccine hesitancy and the problems this phenomenon creates. But how can we criticise those who do not vaccinate their children using scientific evidence while simultaneously ignoring the conclusions of institutions such as EFSA that GMO crops are perfectly safe? We also dispute the assertions laid out in these objections about the use of glufosinate and glyphosate. These GMO authorizations have no bearing on the reauthorization of glyphosate, and it is totally disingenuous to make this link. We have maximum residue levels, MRLs, in place for pesticide residues in all food imports, and GMO imports are no different. So we reject assertions about excessive use of glyphosate and the risk posed by maize and soybean allergens. EFSA's GMO panel in all three cases didn't identify any safety concerns for human consumption with regard to potential toxicity and allergenicity. As a more general point, it's important to note that while the use of GMOs for food use is limited, EU-wide dependency on GMO protein crops for use in animal feed is very significant, as a previous speaker said. It's therefore essential that authorizations proceed as rapidly as possible to keep pace with elsewhere in the world and to avoid disruption in the international trade of agricultural and horticultural commodities.
Thank you. For the GUE, Ms. Hazekamp.
Thank you. The Amazon is burning more visibly than ever, and the outrage over the deforestation of these invaluable ecosystems is growing worldwide. And yet, the Commission authorizes more genetically modified maize and soy varieties. And the painful irony of this should be obvious for everybody. The rainforest and Cerrado are being cleared to feed the enormous hunger of the EU's livestock industry. the maize and soy that is grown on the recently cleared forest grounds over there are used to produce sheep meat and dairy over here. And these are precisely those varieties that we are objecting to today. The Commission knows that these maize and soy varieties have been genetically engineered to be resistant to glyphosate and glufosinate, herbicides which are essential enablers of the slash and burn type of agriculture, which is responsible for the fires in the Amazon. The Commission knows that we need to save the forest and reduce our meat consumption in order to curb global warming and halt biodiversity loss. The Commission knows that glufosinate, which has been banned for the use in the EU because it is reprotoxic, is endangering the population in the exporting countries and is entering our markets and our plates. The Commission knows there is no democratic legitimacy in the authorizations of these GMOs. At least they should know. So why don't you just stop these irresponsible authorizations? Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to give the floor to the Commission for a maximum of 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be in the new formation of this committee, even if also for me it is, again, to speak about resolution against the Commission intentions. But nevertheless, I'm very pleased to explain the position of the Commission and in what sense we are implementing the legislation and protecting human health, animal health and the environment. So we are speaking here about 2 authorizations of GM maize and 1 renewal of soy, which is already on the market. To summarize very quickly, EFSA performed a very comprehensive risk assessment and complied with the rules in the regulation and with the EFSA risk assessment guidance. And no data lack or whatever has been identified. Very, very importantly, member states do comment on EFSA's work, and EFSA has looked at all the comments and responded to them, and it is available on the EFSA website. There is full transparency on the member states' potential criticisms or questioning of certain scientific issues. The member states' comments and the response of EFSA are part of the EFSA opinion. Importantly also, regarding the pesticides, the authorization we are talking about are exclusively about imports. The cultivation takes place in third countries and the herbicides or the pesticides are sprayed in third countries. Very importantly, when the products are imported into the EU, whether they are GMOs or whether they are conventional products, they must comply with the maximum residue levels. And the maximum residue levels are set out in the pesticide legislation, which is also applicable to these products. So the protection of human health is guaranteed by the respect of the maximum residue levels. On the public perception, there are also possibilities for the public to comment on the EFSA opinion. And in this case as well, EFSA has responded in a transparent manner to all the comments made by the public. EFSA has concluded very clearly on the safety of the product for human health, for animal health, and for the environment. In light with this, we have submitted the proposals to the committees of member states, which have to vote on these decisions. And primarily for political reasons, the member states did not take a position. They were not against nor in favor. This was in the standing committee and then in the appeal committee. So in the light of this, there is a legal obligation for the Commission under the GMO legislation to take a decision. Because the EFSA opinions are positive for human health, animal health, and the environment, it is the duty of the Commission to adopt the decisions, the authorizations. Now, regarding the comitology and the democracy, which has been highlighted by some of the speakers, of course, the Commission would like to introduce more democracy, and there is a proposal which is being discussed at the moment. And until this proposal is in place, there is no other way than applying and complying with the existing rules. Particularly, again, as the EFSA opinions are positive. The plant protection product, I explained, the MRLs have to be respected. Now, regarding the dependency on feed imported from third countries, it is very high, and it is correct that we are working to decrease the dependency. But in the meantime, it is there, and our agriculture, our feed sector needs this soybean. So we have no other, I mean, the market is there to ask for these products. If the market would not ask for them, even if we would authorize them, they would not be imported because nobody would buy for them. So I would conclude that in terms of the authorization procedures, we have followed all the steps in a transparent manner in full compliance with the legislation. Regarding the dependency on imports and regarding the issues of the UN Convention and other international agreements, of course these are issues and the Commission is implementing them in the relevant conventions, but they're not directly linked to the individual authorizations we are talking about today. So I hope I have answered the questions. I thank you again for giving us the floor, and I hope we can continue a constructive debate in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
So thank you very much. We're going to close this second debate for the morning. So we meet at 2:30 this afternoon, and then we will vote. Please do not forget your voting cards because we start with the vote and we won't have time for you to get back to your office. So see you this afternoon.